Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I'm Chandler.
And I'm Celeste.
This is True North There.
Ha, got you.
But I didn't do it last time.
You didn't do it last time, so I'm not doing it this time.
That was good. That was good.
Okay, so we're continuing on with Ratface, Pickton.
Rat boy. Smelly.
So we ended with Wendy surviving the attack from Robert, but then the charges being dropped. So shortly after, Gina and Robert ran into each other. Gina told Robert she wasn't doing very well. She had 3 foster children and was surviving off of welfare payments. Foster children money and sex work to support the kids and her drug habit. It wasn't enough, so she continued sex work. Robert would bring her and the children food when she wasn't able to afford it, and Gina would bring the kids to the farm to play. In return, Gina would help Robert find women. She would frequent the Wish Center, which was the safe place for sex workers, and she would tell them that she had a friend with lots of cash and drugs, and she could take them whoever wanted to come. But they knew it was Robert, who was also known as Willie, and the word of what happened to Wendy had spread to the sex worker community. But Gina vouched for Robert, and the women felt safe because Gina would be there. One of the girls that went with Gina was Kelly Little, who was 28 years old. Kelly was a transsexual and had been born with several health conditions, including a cleft lip, jaw deformity, 1 kidney, and hearing loss. She had been living through the foster system since she was only 3 years old. In April of 1997, Kelly was reported missing. Neighbors said they heard screaming in Gina's backyard the last night she was seen alive.
Oh, Jesus.
The next victim was 37-year-old Janet Henry. She came from a large Aboriginal family with 10 siblings who all lived in the foster system after their family died in a boating accident. Her older sister ended up being raped and murdered by 5 men. One of her old brothers died from after he was hit by a car, and another sister had overdosed on prescription drugs. Janet herself had a terrible encounter with the serial rapist and murderer Clifford Olson, the guy we talked in the first episode.
Yeah.
After drugging and assaulting her, he released her in downtown Eastside. So Janet has
Jesus.
gone.
Yeah.
Despite Janet's addiction, she still kept a close relationship with her sister Sandra, speaking on the phone almost every day. One night in June, Janet was supposed to meet Sandra for dinner, but she never showed up. Sandra reported her missing and spent several days searching the streets for her sister, but she did find out that Janet had been frequently going to parties at the Pickton farm. In August, 32-year-old Helen Hallmark disappeared. Helen also was raised in the foster system starting at just 13 years old. She struggled with addiction and, despite many attempts, was unable to get clean. But she would speak to troubled teens, using herself as an example of what their life could look like if they followed the wrong path. Another woman to go missing in August 1997 was Jacqueline Murdoch. She was a mother to 4 children and was remembered for her witty sense of humor. So we're only 8 months into 1997, already have 8 missing women.
Jesus Christ.
Late into 1997, Robert was diagnosed with hepatitis C. He blamed Wendy for giving it to him, despite not knowing if she actually was the one that transmitted it to him. He basically said that their blood interacted and she gave it to him.
What the fuck?
In September of 1997, David decided to try to pick up a sex worker. He pulled over next to a woman named Renata and pulled out his penis, saying he wasn't a cop. He was like, "Here's my show of good faith. Here's my dick.
What the fuck?
I'm not a cop." He said he wanted oral sex and offered her $100. She turned him down because he was dirty and smelly. She's like, "You're not worth it." He tried to offer her drugs instead of cash, but she declined again. He asked if she knew anyone else that would be interested, and it was actually for his brother, not himself. Referred David to her friend, 24-year-old Sherry Irvine. She was a beautiful woman with an outgoing personality and long blonde hair with a big smile. Sherry wasn't working the downtown Eastside, though. She was working in the Westminster Burnaby area, which was about a 25-minute drive. She was down on her luck and experiencing homelessness when Renata offered her to stay in her basement. Sherry owed Renata $60 for rent, so Renata figured if Sherry did the job, they could call it even, and Sherry could keep the drugs. David offered them both $100 plus drugs if they came together. David also said that his brother probably wouldn't even be able to get it up anyways, but just liked female company. When they arrived at the farm, Sherry went off with Robert and was never seen again. Renata decided to form a side hustle with David as a recruiter for him to find sex workers. She said she saw something in Robert's eyes that she described as evil, but she just thought David was dumb. In September of 1997, Marnie Frey disappeared. She loved animals and had a lively personality. She was a generous and kind woman. She had a daughter, but her addictions took over her life, and she decided it would be best to leave her daughter with her dad and stepmom. She almost died from an overdose when she was 25 years old while living in her car. Around this time, 33-year-old Cindy Beck also went missing. She was the black sheep of her family. She was adopted by a religious family, but she didn't have much interest in the church. She ended up hanging out with the wrong crowd and became addicted to drugs, moving from Kitchener, Ontario to Vancouver. At the end of 1997, Cynthia Fox also went missing. Her father was a cheating alcoholic. When her parents divorced, she was 6 years old. When she turned 16, she decided she wanted to meet him and tracked him down in Florida. But she was definitely disappointed when he met her at the airport with weed and alcohol and tried to convince her to have sex with him.
Oh.
Yep. When she declined, he pointed a gun at her. She was traumatized from this encounter and turned to drugs and alcohol as soon as she returned home.
Jesus.
She went from being a super skilled competitive swimmer with good grades to dropping out and shoplifting, doing anything she could to fuel her heroin addiction. She got married in her early 20s and had a daughter who was born addicted to heroin. She tried over and over to detox and kick her addiction, but she was never able to fully rid herself of her demons. She ended up in the downtown Eastside, where she was last seen on November 26, 1997, when she was 43 years old.
Jesus.
Another girl to go missing shortly after was 25-year-old Andrea Borhoven. She also had an unhappy childhood. No one really wanted her as she was frequently moved between family members, but she was always trying to maintain a positive attitude. When she was 13, she was busted for smoking weed and was also diagnosed with ADHD. Her mother was fed up with her and decided to make her a ward of the state so she could go to a special treatment facility, but she didn't stay there long. She ran away and ended up on the streets of downtown Eastside. She was last seen sometime in 1997. The holiday season brought less busy streets and less opportunity for Robert, some of his pigs to town, and set them up.
What the fuck?
Someone called the Humane Society and stopped Robert's fun. Womp womp. On Christmas Day, 38-year-old Carrie Koski went to celebrate with her family, but they were horrified when she arrived and looked completely starved. She was a victim of domestic violence and addicted to heroin. Her family last saw her on Christmas Day. She was beautiful, a talented dancer, and generous. She was raising 3 teenage girls alone. She went missing sometime between Christmas of 1997 and January of 1998. Carrie's sister reported her missing, but as per usual, the police weren't interested. One of her daughters pleaded that they had to find her mom, but the police said she was probably just out partying. At the end of 1997, 13 women were missing. But still, the Vancouver police turned a blind eye. They had no intention of taking the missing women seriously. 1998 came and things didn't change. Inga Monique Hall was the first woman to disappear. She was last seen on February 26, 1998. She was 46 and had 2 daughters. Just over a month later, 28-year-old Sarah DeVry went missing. She was stunning. At only 11 months old, she was adopted to a family with 3 older siblings, but Sarah struggled in her new community. She was dark-skinned with a mix of Indigenous, Black, and Mexican heritage, and the family that adopted her was a middle-class white family. She always felt like she didn't belong. She was ruthlessly bullied. When she was a teenager, one of her friends introduced her to Vancouver's downtown, and she finally felt like she belonged. There were plenty of Indigenous women and other women of mixed backgrounds. She was only 18 when she became fully immersed into the downtown Eastside. She was a natural artist with a talent for cooking, writing, and drawing. Soon after beginning sex work, she moved in with her pimp and a handful of other sex workers. They lived in a rundown house in the downtown Eastside. She had 2 children, were both born addicted to cocaine and heroin and given to her family. Shortly after, she met a new client named Wayne, who ended up falling in love with her. Wayne was newly divorced and picked up Sarah. He quickly fell in love with her, but Sarah wasn't interested in love. She just wanted to be friends. She was desperate for a safe place, though, and ended up moving into his home for a while, but ended up returning to the downtown Eastside. Wayne accepted their friendship, but always hoped for more. They remained close friends until her disappearance in 1998. Her and another sex worker went out together, but only one friend returned. Wayne noticed that she did not return with her friend and went to the police to report her missing, but they didn't take his report seriously. He decided he was the one that needed to get to the bottom of her disappearance on his own and started calling Sarah's family and questioning people on the street asking if they had seen her, handing out posters with her face on them and hanging them with his number. He was determined to find her, or at least find out what happened to her. Eventually, Sarah's sister Maggie was successful in filing a missing persons report with the police. Sarah was the 48th woman to go missing from the downtown Eastside over 20 years. 48 women later, finally, it was decided that something had to happen. The families of the missing women were flooding into stations, demanding for something to be done, and the officers agreed it was time to bring Kim Rosmo back in. But he was on holidays for the summer, so the investigation would have to wait. But publicly, the Vancouver Police Department continued to deny that there was any connection to any of the missing women, denying that there was potentially a serial killer on their hands. They blamed the drug epidemic, but the reporter, Lindsay, was already connecting the dots. She started speaking to the families of the missing women. Wayne approached Lindsay to bring Sarah's case to the news. Lindsay did extensive interviews with family and ended up publishing a 2-part story in the Vancouver Sun. Wayne ended up being Sarah's champion and said that the police and citizens seemed to think that sex workers were not worthy of an investigation and just got what they deserved. But he said they were loved by many. Wayne ended up being someone that people would call for tips, and one day he got an interesting call from a man called Bill Hiscox.
Hiscox?
Hiscox. Yes.
Sorry.
It's okay. He claimed that he worked for David's demolition company in 1997 and 1998 and spent lots of time on the Pickton farm. Bill said that Robert was a very strange character and believed he may be the one responsible for all the missing women. He noticed women's clothing all over the farm and informed Wayne that Robert had been charged with Wendy's attempted murder but got away with it. Bill also tipped Wayne off to the potential hiding spots on the farm and how Robert came back with women from downtown Eastside regularly. He also said that Lisa claimed there was a ton of IDs and purses at Robert's place. Bill also told Wayne that he had shared this information with Vancouver police on multiple occasions. When Kim Rosmo returned from holidays, he created a new report and determined that there indeed was a serial killer still at work. But the Vancouver police claimed that wasn't possible since there were no bodies. Okay.
Idiots.
But they're still gone.
Idiots.
No one seemed to want to take on the task of the investigation, but eventually Project Amelia was formed, and their task was to look into the disappearances of women from 1971 to 1998. So like a 27. The task force officers hit the streets to interview other sex workers and made note of any bad encounters they had. They also collected DNA samples from the families of the missing women. They were hoping to use this DNA to identify bodies whenever they found them. Despite the police starting to actively investigate, Robert had no intention of slowing down. 31-year-old Julie Louise Young went missing, and next was 28-year-old Angela Jardine. She had an intellectual disability and was not given the support she needed as an adult to thrive. She met a boyfriend in downtown Eastside that took advantage of her disability. Despite her toxic relationship, she maintained a good relationship with her family. In November of 1998, she attended a rally in downtown Eastside that was about drugs and addiction. The rally was called Out of Harm's Way. She spent the better part of the day at the rally, but decided she needed a fix and turned to sex working to earn money for drugs. Around the same time, 19-year-old Michelle Gurney went missing. She was last seen on December 11th, 1998. Shortly after, Marcy Creason disappeared after being released from custody on sex working charges. Ruby Ann Hardy was last seen sometime in late 1998 when she was 37 years old. The total for 1998 was 11 missing women. In early 1999, an employee of Robert and David also started growing suspicious that Robert was responsible. His name was Scott Chubb. And he spent most of his time on the farm for the past several years doing all sorts of jobs, from being David's driver and working at Piggy's Palace as security. Scott was aware of Robert's special talent for butchering and was curious about all the women's clothing and other belongings all over the farm. He decided to go to David with his thoughts and encourage David to get Robert away from the streets of downtown Eastside. But David wasn't really interested in Scott's theory. He was too busy regularly dealing with police at Piggy's Palace and the citizens who wanted it shut down. He was like, Robert is not my problem. 1999 arrived, and women continued to go missing. Jacqueline MacDonald, a regular of Wish, was 22 years old when she went missing. 1999 also brought two new residents of the Pickton farm, Lynn Ellingson and Andrew Bellwood. They were friends of Gina's. Lynn had just left a violent relationship and was addicted to drugs and alcohol. She had a son that was being raised by her parents. Gina met Lynn and offered for her to stay at Robert's farm. She said in exchange for rent, there was plenty to do around the farm. They were always looking for help, and there was a spare room in Robert's trailer. Her housing was only supposed to be a short-term solution, but she ended up being at the farm and transitioned from a farmhand to an admin clerk for David's business. Lynn wasn't used to making decent money and started to use drugs more heavily. She said at this time she was pretty much always high. Andrew also needed shelter and money. He was in his early 30s and was recently clean after completing a rehab program. But the addiction called him again, and he was back on drugs. He was working as a truck driver while sleeping in the truck when he made a delivery to the Pickton farm. Him and Robert struck up a conversation, and Robert offered him a job and a place to stay in exchange. One night, while hanging out in the trailer, Robert and Andrew were exchanging stories when they had a strange encounter. Andrew was sitting in a chair watching TV when Willie, aka Robert, sat on the corner of the bed and asked if he wanted to go find a hooker with him. Andrew said he wasn't really into hookers, but Willie wasn't backing off. He grabbed a leather belt, piece of wire, and some handcuffs and got onto his knees on the bed, pretending there was a woman with him. He pretended to put handcuffs on an arm and then grabbed his belt and pretended to put it around the neck while stroking the invisible woman's hair, saying everything would be all right.
What the fuck?
Like, literally fantasizing with Andrew right there.
Ugh.
Once done his charade, he sat on the chair beside Andrew and said, "Do you know how much people bleed? You wouldn't believe how much people bleed. I take them to the barn, hang them, and gut them."
What the fuck?
He went on to explain to Andrew that pigs will eat pretty much anything you give to them, including human remains. And anything the pigs don't eat go into barrels to the rendering plant with the rest of the animal waste. Andrew felt sick and was worried that Robert was under the impression Andrew may help with his endeavors, but Andrew just sat there silently. He's like, "Sir, you've told me too much."
Yeah.
Robert realized he shared too much and told Lynn that Andrew was stealing from them and asked if she could get some guys to rough him up. Andrew said he was innocent and had never stolen from Robert or Lynn, but he was attacked by the men as they demanded he return the stolen goods within 24 hours or they were coming back to kill him. Andrew decided he overstayed his welcome and went to stay at Gina's basement apartment instead, never going back to the farm.
Good choice.
Yeah.
Maybe tell the cops though.
That too. In 1999, Vancouver and the BC government came together to offer a $100,000 reward for anyone that gave information leading to the arrest of the person responsible for the missing woman. At the same time, PACE, aka Prostitution Alternatives Counseling and Education, began interviewing sex workers in the area. They interviewed nearly 200 women, and 58% of them struggled with addictions, and over half of them had been robbed while working. Also, 39% of them had been kidnapped or held, and roughly a third had survived attempted murders.
Jesus.
40% of the women did not report these crimes due to the distrust of the law enforcement, which is like, yeah, fair. They're literally doing nothing for you. Lynn eventually also became suspicious of Robert and approached David to ask him about the rumors of human parts in the freezer. David agreed to hear Lynn out in the trailer, but once in the trailer, he attacked her, pushing her against the wall. She tried to run away, but he pursued her. She grabbed a vase and threw it, smashing a window. David wanted her out, but Robert was still enjoying her company. One night, Robert invited Lynn to go out for a drive to run some errands. She hopped in the truck. After the errands, he drove to the downtown Eastside, and Robert asked if she would mind if he had a female companion for the night. She said she didn't mind, but she needed some drugs. He stopped and bought her some crack cocaine and then went to find a sex worker. He found a beautiful woman with long, thick black hair. She leaned into the window of the car and asked Lynn if she was going to be there. To Lynn replied, "Yeah, I'm staying there." The girl hopped into the truck and Lynn went back to her room while Robert and the girl went to his. But Lynn had a really strange feeling. She went to go check on the girl. When she opened Robert's bedroom door, there was no one to be found, just clothes. Then a light out of the corner of her eye caught her attention. It was the butchering barn. Following her gut feeling,
Oh,
she
no.
walked towards the barn and pushed the door open. To her horror, the girl was hanging. Robert noticed her and grabbed her and made her sit and watch, threatening she would hang next to her if she said anything. Robert walked a shell-shocked Lynn back to the trailer. He called her a cab, and she went to Surrey to drown out the memory with alcohol and drugs. The day following Lynn discovering the woman in the barn, 35-year-old Georgina Papin was discovered missing. Georgina fit the description of the woman in the barn. She was a talented artist and singer who had 7 children, 2 of which were just baby twins. Scott Chubb later claimed to see Georgina with Robert after she was last seen by friends. In the early summer of 1999, a constable with the Vancouver police and a task force officer with Project Amelia named Larama Shauna met with Kim Rosmo. Larama told Kim that he was very suspicious of Robert Pickton being the killer of the downtown Eastside woman. Larama gave Bill's tip and also relayed what Lynn told them about the finding Robert in the barn with Georgina hanging from the ceiling. Larama also informed Kim that he knew Robert had a wood chipper on the property. Larama asked Kim for what the next step should be. Kim suggested surveillance. Larama brought the suggestion of surveillance to his boss, but was told that it was too expensive and the resources were not available. So
Come the fuck
Larama,
on.
I know. So he instead went to the RCMP for help, and luckily, they agreed to assist in the surveillance operation. A few constables set up as surveillance and were told to stop Robert if he picked up any woman. They followed him around for a few weeks but didn't see any suspicious activity. But they had a feeling that Robert knew he was being followed. The surveillance operation wasn't successful and ended after a few weeks. But Kim had been putting together another analysis on the missing woman. He went through over 800 cases from 1995 to 1998. That's so many people.
Mm-hmm.
About 20 of them were significant, and he put together a case to present to the Vancouver police. He identified that the most likely cause of their disappearances was someone preying on sex workers to kill. He realized that the other deaths were typically women that died in domestic situations or drug encounters, and their bodies were always recovered. But this was not the same as what was happening in the study he presented to the police. Also included in his report was what he called a cluster body site. He theorized that the killer was disposing of most of the women in one site. He said it was likely that the site was in the wilderness close to the perpetrator's property. Lastly, he said the killer was definitely a local that knew the area. After presenting his findings to the police, they still weren't completely convinced, but committed 2 more homicide detectives to Project Amelia, hoping fresh eyes would help the task force. The public concern was growing, and the pressure was starting to boil over for answers. The international media was also catching wind of the missing woman and was even featured in America's Most Wanted, comparing the killer to a modern-day Jack the Ripper. The families of the missing women formed a rally and memorial walk at the First United Church at downtown Eastside. Over 300 people attended, including many of the children of the women who had all vanished. 23 women were remembered and celebrated as their families gave heartbreaking testimony to who they were and how much they were missed. Community members joined in with signs saying that these women were not disposable and demanded justice. Project Amelia decided to reach out to the larger cities to see if, like in Canada, to see if they were also seeing a large number of missing women, but Vancouver seemed to be the only city in Canada dealing with missing women on this scale. At this point, it was estimated that there were 32 victims tied to one killer. The Project Amelia team members continued to get to know the women on the streets and gain their trust. If they were going to get to the bottom of this, the personal relationships, trust, and connections were going to be the most important, especially in a community that did not trust the police. Another source came forward, Ross Caldwell, who was known to Robert. Ross called the police to let them know that Lynn had told him she witnessed Georgina hanging in the barn, and Robert forced her to watch him butcher her. Lynn was feeling tremendous guilt that she helped bring Georgina back to the farm. Lynn refused to come into the police station. She was fearful of Robert and believed she really would be hanging in the same spot if Robert found out she was the one that spoke to police. Plus, police weren't taking her word as truth since she struggled with drugs and admitted that she had a large amount of cocaine that night. Eventually, Lynn worked up the courage to demand money from Robert in exchange for her silence. He agreed to write her several checks that would eventually add up to $1,000. She was satisfied for now. In November of 1999, Wendy Crawford, a 43-year-old woman, disappeared. Wendy struggled with her health, including diabetes and Crohn's disease. At some point, she turned to drugs to help her pain. She had two children she was raising on her own. Due to her health complications, she was unable to maintain a job and had to rely on welfare checks to get by. When Wendy had time and was feeling okay, she would go to downtown Eastside to earn her family extra money as the welfare checks were hardly enough. On December 27th, 28-year-old Jennifer Ferminga went missing. She was a shy but sweet girl. She was also adopted as a baby and decided she wanted to find her parents, so she went to Vancouver to look for her biological mother. But instead, she found herself on the downtown Eastside, living in a sketchy hotel room with her boyfriend and young son.
Oof.
In 1999, the total missing woman count was 4, less than the previous years, but that was to be expected with an actual police presence now, and Robert feeling suspicious that the police were surveilling him. While investigating Robert, the Vancouver Police Department ran into a problem. They didn't actually have jurisdiction of where Robert's farm was, since it was outside the city. So the RCMP was responsible for the case, and they began their own investigation in October of 1999. They dedicated their already existing strike force unit and provincial unsolved homicide unit to investigate Robert. A few months after they began their investigation, they sent out a memo that Robert was no longer a high priority, but they were continuing with the investigation. But by 2000, there wasn't even mention of Pickton in the memos. Like, how? How? On New Year's Eve 1999, Piggy's Palace hosted a massive party to ring in the new century. Over 1,700 people attended.
Holy fuck.
Yeah, remember, it was like...
It's rated for 150 people.
Yes. Yeah. This would be the last party at Piggy's Palace.
That's fucking insane.
Once the police realized how big the party was, they came and shut it down, and the fire marshal closed the venue for good. The Good Times Society wouldn't provide their financial statements, so they lost their nonprofit status. On January 19th, 2000, the RCMP decided to interview Robert again about the stabbing attack on Wendy. Robert didn't offer any new information, but was suspicious that Lynn had shared more information with the police. He was paying her for her silence, but had a feeling that she wasn't living up to her end of the bargain. Around the same time, Scott Chubb was looking for work again. While working in the farmyard together, Robert offered Scott $1,000 to hurt Lynn. He said Lynn had cost him over $10,000 in hush money and suggested several ways Scott could hurt her, even mentioning that Robert himself had injected someone with antifreeze and they died almost immediately.
Holy fuck.
He told Scott that would be the safest bet because the police would just assume she died of an overdose and wouldn't even look twice. But Scott was not interested. He was not a murderer. He told Robert he wouldn't be hurting Lynn. Scott also noticed at this time that Robert had several guns on the property. He had even borrowed Scott a Browning semi-automatic pistol. The morale at Project Amelia was at an all-time low. They were getting nowhere even 2 years into their investigation. Along with butting heads within the task force, there was also the issue of not inputting data properly or even at all, resulting in it being lost within the system. It's like just completely half-assing this.
What the fuck?
The task force was understaffed and underfunded. They were all working part-time on the task force while also doing their full-time duties. Most were junior officers and had not even received training on how to deal with a case of this magnitude. Gina became known to the police force as someone who would go looking for girls for Robert. They were going to keep a close eye on her. Robert also made a new friend named Dinah Taylor. She was a woman in her late 20s, only 5 foot 6 inches, but she was fiery. She was described by the other women as aggressive and menacing. She had a long criminal past for drug trafficking as well as being a pimp. She had been living in the downtown Eastside for several years, and everyone stayed out of her way as everyone was afraid of her as she had a reputation for being dangerous.
Jesus.
She also would prowl at Wish and sometimes would literally drag women out to send them on dates. In late 1999, Dinah started to stay at the Pickton farm occasionally, but before long, Robert was spoiling her with new clothes, money, drugs, and whatever else she wanted. Robert forced Gina out and replaced her with Dinah. The 2000s brought sex workers using the buddy system. Instead of going on dates alone, they would go in pairs to keep an eye on each other. Tiffany, Drew, and Ashwan were a pair living together in a hotel room, and they would go out together. But one night, Tiffany went out alone and never returned. She was only 25 years old. Ashwan was distraught and went to the Wish Center pleading for help. One of the staff contacted police, but the officer said she would come back soon and dismissed them. The head of the Wish Center, Elaine Allen, reported later that the officer was very casual and disinterested. Ashwan returned to the Wish Center each night looking for Tiffany or any information. At one point, a constable even sat her down and told Ashwan that Tiffany had entered a rehab program, which was a lie. So the cops are like, she's not actually missing, she's in rehab.
Oh my god.
Yeah. So they're blatantly lying now.
What the fuck?
Tiffany's sister Kelly was determined to track her down. She attempted to file a missing persons report, but was told, "What do you expect? She's a prostitute." They never took her report. Kim Ross was gaining an international reputation for his methods, but back home in Vancouver, he was still met with disrespect and skepticism, especially by one of his superiors, John Unger. John secretly closed Kim's profiling unit, stating it was due to the lack of budget. But the writing was on the wall. John didn't believe in the work Kim was doing. The Vancouver Sun found out that the profiling unit had been dissolved and called out that the Vancouver police owed the public an explanation as to why they were disregarding Kim Rossmo, who had now garnered a flawless reputation for his groundbreaking methods. It's like he's literally being recruited all over. And
Yeah.
Vancouver's like, nah, doesn't seem real to us.
Yeah. We don't need him. What the hell?
Kim left Vancouver Police Department around this time, and Project Amelia was also receiving budget cuts and went from 9 detectives to 6. This left several Vancouver and RCMP officers stunned and outraged. They decided to take matters into their own hands and started an informal group to look at the case to see what could be done. They called themselves Project Even-Handed or the Missing Women Task Force. First on their agenda, acknowledge the public and let them know that they did believe there was a killer hunting women in downtown Eastside. They prioritized their suspects into 3 different categories. Suspects under Priority 1 had previous charges of murder or sexual offenses of women in the downtown Eastside. Robert was filed under Priority 1 along with a few other men. But this was an informal task force, more of like a case review.
Okay.
They weren't officially investigating anything. Despite the number of missing women being drastically less in 1999, the women of downtown Eastside were staying vigilant, and they were right to, because 3 more women disappeared. Karen Abraham was 35 years old when she went missing. She had 2 daughters. She went missing sometime in 2000, but wasn't reported missing until 3 years later. Dawn Cray was the next to go missing. Her sister Lorraine went out to look for her and found her belongings in her hotel room. Dinah Taylor, Robert's new BFF, confirmed that she was with Dawn just before she went missing. The community rumor was that Dinah had convinced Dawn to go back to the Pickton farm with her. 43-year-old Deborah Jones was the final woman to disappear in 2000. She had a love for music and was a talented musician and singer. 2000 started with another disappearance, 27-year-old Patricia Johnson. She was affectionately known as Patty. She was desperate to get clean but couldn't shake her addiction. She was also noticed by a photographer one day named Lincoln Clarks, who took her photo with 2 friends on some steps in downtown Eastside. This was the first of an iconic series of women in the downtown Eastside. The series was named Heroines, like heroes.
Yeah.
But heroines.
But also heroin.
Yeah. She was reported
Wow.
missing after she failed to pick up her welfare check and missed her son's birthday. Her mother attempted to report her missing but was told that she went to Montreal. Like, where are they getting these freaking things?
Yikes.
Meanwhile, Project Even Handed was growing in size and Robert Pickton was their main suspect. Since missing persons reports were essentially denied, the task force thought maybe the threat was dying down. But the woman on the street denied the threat was gone and started reporting to the task force instead. In March 2001, there were 3 more women to disappear: 24-year-olds Heather Bottomley, Yvonne Boone, and Heather Chinook. All 3 women were mothers desperate to get clean and reunite with their children. Heather would sometimes hang out at the Pickton farm. There were great parties there. But her boyfriend Gary didn't like her hanging out there, especially with the Hells Angels crew. She also told him she felt there was a prostitution ring operating out of the farm. When she went missing, she was living in Surrey with Gary. They had an argument and she hopped into a cab, never to be seen again. She was only 30 years old. Next to vanish was 23-year-old Andrea Josbury. When she was only 16, she met a 30-year-old man and was hopeful that he would be the ticket to a new and stable life. She had grown up with an abusive alcoholic father and was trying to get away. Little did she know he was actually a pimp and a drug dealer that intended on using Andrea as one of his sex workers. He moved her to Vancouver and they had a daughter together. He got her addicted to drugs and he had their baby taken by CFS, making her rely on drugs even more. She was diagnosed with HIV and her boyfriend was arrested. While he was in jail, she started a methadone program and regularly visited the Wish Center. One day she missed a methadone appointment. Her doctor called her family to let them know. Her brother immediately headed down to the downtown Eastside, desperate to find her, and reported her missing. Meanwhile, Kim Rossmo was offered a new job as the director of research at the Police Foundation based in Washington, D.C. Finally, a job worthy of him. Shortly after starting his new position, his court against Vancouver Police Department began, and it was going to reveal a lot of shocking information to the public. Kim believed that in 1998, he brought his belief that there was a serial killer to the Vancouver police, encouraging them to get to the bottom of it ASAP, but he was immediately dismissed of his beliefs. His second complaint against the Vancouver police was that they literally went out of their way to tell the public there was not a serial killer. This caused immense frustration within the public and was extremely distressing to the families of the missing women. Kim said if the police had issued a warning, the sex workers of downtown Eastside would have likely been way more cautious much earlier. Eventually, the case was dismissed, and Kim's contract was not renewed with the Vancouver police, which was fine because he had a much better gig now where he was actually respected. But all of this information now being public record was terrible for the Vancouver Police Department's already shitty reputation. Around this time is when another survival story emerged. Katrina was a career criminal who had robbed 19 banks. She was out on bail waiting for trial, but her husband was in max security just over an hour from downtown Eastside. After visiting her husband, she was hitchhiking when a van appeared and offered her a ride. The van was filthy and smelled absolutely awful, which made her a little anxious to accept the ride. The driver said he was going to Poco. She asked if he could drop her off in Sydney. The man agreed and said his name was Willie and asked Katrina if she wanted a joint. She accepted and offered him a drag, but he declined. After a few drags, Willie made a comment that sent chills down Katrina's spine. He said that since her husband was in prison, he wouldn't miss her if she didn't come home. Her stomach dropped and she started to look for an exit. She noticed the handle on her door was removed and that she was trapped. She noticed he passed the exit for her to get home. She started rummaging through her bag, looking for something to defend herself. She found a pencil and stabbed Robert in the neck and gouged his eyes with her thumbs.
Hi, girl.
Yeah, for real. She jumped over his lap and spilled out the driver door, landing on her face. She ran expecting him to follow her, but when she looked back, he was just standing by the van, laughing.
What the fuck?
She ran to the nearest gas station and called for the police, who said they would look for the van. Serena Abbotsway was Robert's next victim. She grew up in the foster system and eventually moved into a group home. She gravitated to the downtown Eastside and started using drugs. In 1997, she was assaulted by one of her sex working clients and almost died. She was beaten so badly she had a fractured skull but ended up back on the streets after having a steel plate inserted into her head. She was well loved at the Wish Center as well as at her church. She was only 29 years old when she was last seen in July of 2001. The local news started reporting that Project Even Hand's investigation revealed that the number of missing women was actually much higher than suspected. Their new estimate was now 45 women.
Wow.
While the Vancouver Police Department only reported 27 missing. So, like, pretty much half of them they denied missing persons reports. The Vancouver Sun published an in-depth article of the Vancouver Police Department, which was quickly the talk of BC. Between the information released by the Vancouver Sun and Kim Rosmo's trial, the public became completely outraged. They were no longer willing to turn a blind eye to the missing women and stay quiet. They put more pressure on the Vancouver police, finally forcing them to take the missing woman reports more seriously. The Missing Women's Task Force started contacting families and held a meeting with over 50 family members and 10 police officers, where they finally debriefed everyone of where they were at with their investigation and promised to keep everyone informed. The next day, the police finally announced that they would be treating the cases as homicides. Diane Rock was 35 years old. She was only 16 when she became a mother to a daughter. Shortly after, she married the father and had a second baby, then one more. But her marriage fell apart, and she was now raising 3 children as a single mom. She started working in bars as a dancer, where she was offered drugs to make her feel more confident. She met a man named Darren Rock and they moved to BC. Diane was hopeful that this was her fresh start. They had 2 more children after moving to Vancouver, but her second marriage fell apart and she turned back again to drugs to cope with the loss. Eventually, her addiction took over and her children were taken away from her by family members. One night, Diane reached out to her friend Janice, asking to pick her up from a party on the farm. She said she had been beaten, but that was all she would say. Diane started a new relationship with a drug dealer who abused her. She decided to leave him but had nowhere to go and ended up living in downtown Eastside.
Jeez.
Janice received a call from Diane, again asking for a ride. From Poco, she again looked beaten up with a fat lip and bruising everywhere. Diane told Janice she was partying on a farm where she got free drugs, but ended up being held in a basement for 3 days.
Oh my God.
Being raped by several guys over and over again. Janice begged for Diane to go to the hospital, but she was afraid. Shortly after Diane went missing and was never seen again, in November 2001, 26-year-old Mona Wilson went missing. She was a popular girl on downtown Eastside, but she also grew up in the foster system after surviving a horrific beating from a family member at only 6 years old. But her past trauma caught up to her, and she turned to drugs and sex work after having a son. At the end of 2001, Terry Gritton was offered $100 in drugs by Robert Pickton. She agreed to his offer but to join him and several other women already in his truck. She had severe asthma and struggled to breathe as soon as she got into the filthy truck. She demanded he let her out. He let her out after beating her in the face. And that's part 2.
Jesus Christ.
Like, I just don't understand how this happened for so long.
He started his first kill was 95 or 94?
No. Let me see.
Because it's 2002 now?
Yeah.
Holy fuck, he's been doing it for way too long. Vancouver police is like, nah, they're alright.
Well, like, they started a task force in 1987.
Oh, was it 85 was his first?
Maybe.
Holy shit.
I don't know. There's so much going on. It's so hard to keep track of what's going on.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, but that's part 2.
Wow.
The final part will be coming to you next
Monday.
Yeah, we hope you have a great weekend. And
try not to think about this shit too much.
Yeah, try not to think about this while you're eating your bacon.
Oh, no. Oh, God.
And
stay spooky, True Northers.
Terror is closer than you think.
Wow.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of True North Terror. If you like our podcast, please help us grow by leaving a rating and review. If you have a story you want us to hear, or your own personal story you want to hear on the pod as a listener story, email us at truenorthterrorpod@gmail.com. Join us next week for another episode of True North Terror.